You'll never be anything more than a pathetic country girl playing dress-up in a world that will never accept you. And my son will throw you away like yesterday's trash the moment he gets bored with your little virgin act." The words sliced through Maria Santos like a blade dipped in acid, each syllable calculated to destroy not just her hope, but her very soul. "Mrs. Victoria Blackwell stood before her in the marble foyer that reeked of old money and fresh orchids. Her Chanel suit pristine as armor, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal champagne flute that probably cost more than Maria's entire year of community college tuition. Maria's calloused hands, still rough from years of cleaning other people's houses and caring for her bedridden mother, trembled as she smoothed down her only decent dress. The cotton fabric, washed so many times it felt like silk against her olive skin, suddenly felt like burlap under Victoria's predatory gaze. The woman's cold blue eyes dissected her with surgical precision, cataloging every flaw, every sign of her humble origins. The scent of expensive perfume and leather furniture couldn't mask the metallic taste of humiliation filling Maria's mouth. She had driven 8 hours from rural Tennessee in her dying pickup truck, spending her last $40 on gas, because this housekeeping job was her only chance to pay for her mother's medications. Lupus didn't care about pride, and neither did the mounting hospital bills that threatened to take away their small farm, the only thing her late father had left them. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Maria said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm only here about the housekeeping position your assistant posted online." Victoria's laugh was like crystal shattering against marble. "Oh, sweet child. Do you think I was born yesterday? I saw the way my son's eyes stripped you naked the moment you walked through that door." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper that made Maria's skin crawl. "I've seen that predatory look before, and I've destroyed naive little girls like you who thought they could use their bodies to climb out of the gutter." The sound of Italian leather on marble announced his arrival before Maria saw him. Sebastian Blackwell descended the grand staircase like a fallen angel returning to his throne, every step calculated, every movement radiating the kind of dangerous power that came from never hearing the word no. At 32, he was devastatingly beautiful in the way that broken men often were. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, dark hair that begged for fingers to run through it, and eyes the color of midnight storms that held secrets Maria instinctively knew would destroy her. His gaze found her immediately, and the impact hit her like lightning. Heat pooled low in her belly as his dark eyes traveled from her wild brown curls to her full lips, down to where her modest neckline couldn't quite hide the curve of her breasts. When he looked at her, she felt like prey being stalked by an apex predator, terrified and inexplicably aroused. But there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. As if he'd been searching for something his entire life and had just found it standing in his foyer, wearing a $30 dress and smelling like honeysuckle and honest work. "Mother," Sebastian said, his voice carrying the kind of cold authority that made grown men tremble. The way he spoke suggested years of careful control, of emotions locked away behind walls built from childhood trauma and corporate warfare. "I trust you're treating our new employee with appropriate hospitality." Victoria's smile was a masterpiece of maternal manipulation. "Of course, darling. Miss Santos and I were just discussing whether she truly understands the nature of her employment here." She turned back to Maria, her eyes glittering with the kind of malice that came from decades of destroying anyone who threatened her perfect world. "Tell me, dear, what exactly do you think you're qualified to clean in a house worth more than your entire bloodline will ever earn?" Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but something fierce and unbreakable inside her, the same spirit that had kept her family's farm running after her father's death, that had carried her through 3 jobs while caring for her dying mother, refused to bend. "I'm qualified to work harder than anyone you've ever met, ma'am. I was raised to believe that integrity and effort are worth more than inherited money and cruelty." The silence that followed was deafening. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked like a countdown to war. Victoria's face went white with rage, her perfectly applied makeup cracking like a porcelain mask. But Sebastian's reaction was something entirely different. His dark eyes flashed with what looked like genuine surprise, followed by something far more dangerous: interest. When was the last time someone had challenged him? When was the last time anyone had looked him in the eye without fear or calculation? How delightfully unexpected, Victoria finally managed, her voice dripping with venom that could kill roses. Sebastian, surely you can see that this little social experiment is already a disaster waiting to happen. The help should know their place, and clearly this one, the decision is mine to make, Sebastian interrupted, his voice cutting through his mother's words like a sword. When he stepped closer, Maria caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her think of midnight rendezvous and silk sheets. And I find Miss Santos's perspective refreshing. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs so hard, she was certain he could hear it. She stood at a crossroads that would change everything. She could feel it in her bones. She needed this job desperately, needed it more than her next breath. But more than that, she needed to prove to this woman, and to herself, that she wouldn't be broken by cruelty or cowed by power. "I'll take the position," she heard herself say, her voice carrying the same steel that had carried her through every hardship life had thrown at her. "And I'll show you both what real value looks like when it's not bought with blood money." Sebastian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but was infinitely more dangerous, like a predator that had just spotted its favorite prey. "Interesting," he murmured, and the way he said it made Maria's knees weak. "Very interesting indeed." Victoria's champagne flute trembled in her grip. "Sebastian, you cannot be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," he said, never taking his eyes off Maria. In that moment, she realized she hadn't just taken a job, she'd declared war on one of the most powerful families in the country. And somehow, looking into Sebastian Blackwell's storm-dark eyes, she suspected she'd also just sealed her own fate in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. The game had begun, and Maria Santos was about to discover that the most dangerous thing about falling wasn't the landing. It was how much you'd want to fall again. Strip. The single word hit Maria like a physical blow as she stood frozen in the doorway of Sebastian Blackwell's private study, a crystal tumbler of whiskey clutched in her trembling hands. The evening sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden shadows across his face as he sat behind his mahogany desk, like a king, holding court. "Excuse me?" Maria's voice came out as barely a whisper, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it across the room. Sebastian's dark eyes never left hers as he leaned back in his leather chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You heard me perfectly. Strip. Every piece." He paused, savoring her shock like fine wine. "Of wallpaper from the east wall. It's being redecorated tomorrow." The relief that flooded through Maria's body was so intense her knees nearly buckled. Heat flamed in her cheeks as she realized where her mind had gone, and the knowing glint in Sebastian's eyes told her he'd orchestrated every second of her humiliation with surgical precision. "You bastard," she breathed, setting the tumbler down with enough force to make the liquid slosh dangerously close to the rim. "Language, Miss Santos," he said, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a predator. "We wouldn't want my mother to think I'm corrupting you." The way he said corrupting made her skin burn and her pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with anger. Though I have to admit, watching you imagine me asking you to undress was illuminating. Maria wanted to slap the smug expression off his devastatingly handsome face. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze with steel in her own. "In your dreams, Mr. Blackwell." "Every single one," he murmured, and the raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. For a moment, the mask of cold control slipped, and she saw something vulnerable underneath, something that looked almost like longing. The moment shattered as Mrs. Blackwell's voice echoed from the hallway. "Sebastian, darling, dinner is served. I do hope our little experiment won't be joining us." Sebastian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Actually, Mother, Miss Santos will be eating in the kitchen with Mrs. Henderson. I'm sure she'll be more comfortable with her own kind." The dismissal stung more than it should have. Maria had known her place, had always known her place. but something about the way he said it, as if she were nothing more than furniture to be moved around at his convenience, made her see red. "How thoughtful of you to know exactly where I belong," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Though I have to wonder, where exactly do you belong, Mr. Blackwell? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're nothing more than a 32-year-old boy still taking orders from mommy." The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian's eyes flashed with something dangerous, anger perhaps, or something far more volatile. When he moved, it was with the swift precision of a striking snake. In 3 strides, he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Careful, little country mouse," he said, his voice low and rough. "You're playing with fire, and I guarantee you'll get burned." Maria tilted her head back to meet his gaze, refusing to be intimidated even as her body betrayed her with a shiver of pure want. "Maybe I like the heat." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, desire, and something that looked dangerously close to respect. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she could practically feel the electricity crackling between them. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway, and he stepped back as if she'd burned him. "Sebastian?" Victoria's voice was closer now, accompanied by the sharp click of designer heels on marble. "Miss Santos was just leaving," he said, but his voice was rougher than before, and Maria didn't miss the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. As she turned to go, she heard him call her name softly. "Maria." She paused, her hand on the door frame, not trusting herself to look back. "The wallpaper," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone. "Start with that tomorrow, but be careful with the corners. Some things are more fragile than they appear." She nodded and fled before he could see the tears threatening to spill over. As she made her way to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been talking about wallpaper at all. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, was a plump woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. She took one look at Maria's face and immediately pulled out a chair at the small wooden table. "Tea and sympathy, love?" she asked with a soft British accent that spoke of comfort and home-baked bread. "Just tea, please," Maria managed, sinking into the chair as exhaustion crashed over her. "First day's always the hardest," Mrs. Henderson said, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "Master Sebastian's not as bad as he seems, you know. He's just wounded. Has been ever since his father died and left him to deal with that viper of a mother." Maria wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into her bones. "How long have you worked here?" 23 years come Christmas. Watched that boy grow up from a sweet child into—" She paused, stirring sugar into her own tea. "Well, let's just say money and grief can poison a person if they let it." "And Mrs. Blackwell?" Mrs. Henderson's expression darkened. "That one's been poisoned since the day she was born. Nearly destroyed Sebastian's father, God rest his soul. Would have succeeded too, if he hadn't found the strength to leave everything to Sebastian instead of her. She doesn't own any of this? Not a penny, and she'll never forgive him for it." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Word of advice, love. Don't let her see you as a threat. Victoria Blackwell has a talent for destroying anything beautiful that comes near her son." A chill ran down Maria's spine. "I'm just the help. I'm hardly a threat." Mrs. Henderson's smile was sad and knowing. "Oh, my dear girl, haven't you looked in a mirror lately? You're everything she fears most. Young, beautiful, and pure of heart. Add to that the way Master Sebastian looked at you today." She shook her head. "Just be careful. Very careful." As Maria lay in her small room in the servants' quarters that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her, she couldn't shake Mrs. Henderson's warning. Through the thin walls, she could hear the low rumble of Sebastian's voice from somewhere above, followed by his mother's sharper tones. She couldn't make out the words, but the tension was unmistakable. They were arguing about something, or someone. A soft knock at her door made her bolt upright. "Miss Santos?" The voice was male, young, one of the other staff members. Yes? Master Sebastian requests that you meet him in the library in 10 minutes. He has specific instructions for tomorrow's work. Maria's pulse quickened. Specific instructions at 11 o'clock at night? Every instinct screamed danger, but something deeper, something reckless and hungry, made her slip on her robe and pad barefoot through the darkened hallways. The library door was slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the corridor. She pushed it open and stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight that greeted her. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, still dressed in his evening clothes, but with his tie loosened and his shirt partially unbuttoned. The flames cast shadows across his face, making him look like something out of a Gothic romance. Beautiful and dangerous and absolutely devastating. "You came," he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his surprise. "You summoned," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Master." His eyes flashed at the title, and she realized her mistake immediately. There was nothing submissive about the way she'd said it. It was pure challenge, and they both knew it. "Close the door," he said softly. Maria hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached behind her and pushed the door shut with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence, and she realized with crystal clarity that she'd just crossed a line there would be no going back from. Whatever game they'd been playing was about to become deadly serious. "Take off your robe." The words hung in the air between them like a loaded gun, and Maria felt her world tilt on its axis. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her skin feel like it was on fire. The library around them, with its leather-bound books and ancient mahogany shelves, suddenly felt intimate and dangerous, like a stage set for seduction. "I beg your pardon?" Maria's voice came out breathier than she intended, her hands instinctively clutching the thin cotton robe tighter around her body. Sebastian's lips curved into that predatory smile that had been haunting her dreams. "You heard me perfectly, Miss Santos. The robe. Remove it." He paused, letting her imagination run wild before delivering the killing blow. "You're dripping water all over my Persian rug." Maria looked down and felt heat flame in her cheeks. In her haste to reach the library, she'd rushed past the bathroom where she'd been washing her face, and droplets of water were indeed falling from her damp hair onto the priceless carpet beneath her feet. "You're enjoying this," she accused, but there was no real anger in her voice, just the breathless awareness of a woman who knew she was being hunted by a master predator. "More than I should," he admitted, moving closer with that fluid grace that reminded her of a panther stalking its prey. "You're quite beautiful when you're flustered, Maria. All that fire and innocence wrapped up in a package that would make angels weep." The way he said her name, like a prayer and a curse combined, made her knees weak. She wanted to run, but more than that, she wanted to stay and see just how far this dangerous game would go. "Is that what this is about?" she asked, finding her voice. "You're bored with your society, women, and decided to play with the help?" Sebastian's expression darkened, and suddenly he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Don't," he said, his voice low and rough. "Don't cheapen what's happening between us." "What is happening between us?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and Maria realized she genuinely didn't know. Was this seduction? Manipulation? Something else entirely? "I wish I knew," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her heart stutter. "All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you. About the way you stood up to my mother. About the fire in your eyes when you're angry. About what you'd taste like if I kissed you right now." Maria's breath caught. "Sebastian, I could give you everything," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that made her skin tingle. "Designer clothes, jewelry, a life most women only dream of. All you'd have to do is say yes." The offer hung between them like forbidden fruit, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. For a moment, Maria let herself imagine it. Silk dresses and champagne, never worrying about money again, her mother's medical bills paid in full. Then reality crashed back down like a bucket of ice water. "Is that what you think I am?" she asked, stepping back until her spine hit the bookshelf. Some poor girl who can be bought with pretty things? Sebastian's face went carefully blank. Isn't that what everyone wants? Security? Comfort? Not everyone, Maria said, and the disappointment in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Some of us want to be valued for more than our bodies or our willingness to be kept pets. The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian stared at her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve, and Maria realized with a sinking heart that he genuinely didn't understand. How could he? He'd been raised in a world where everything had a price, where love was just another transaction. You're right, he said finally, and the admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. I apologize. That was crude of me. Yes, it was, Maria agreed, but her voice was softer now. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he was struggling to navigate unfamiliar territory. Sebastian, what happened to you? What made you think that everyone can be bought? Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or old wounds that had never properly healed. My father, he said simply. He loved my mother more than life itself, and she destroyed him piece by piece. Used his love as a weapon until there was nothing left of the man I remembered. Maria felt her heart break for the little boy who had watched his father's destruction. Not all women are like your mother, aren't they? Sebastian laughed, but there was no humor in it. Every woman I've ever known has wanted something. Money, status, connections. You're the first one who's ever turned down what I was offering. Maybe I'm not turning it down, Maria said quietly. Maybe I'm just asking for something different. What? To be seen. Really seen. Not as a conquest or a charity case or a way to rebel against your mother. Just me. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment, and Maria held her breath. Then slowly he reached out and touched her face with fingers that trembled slightly. I see you, he whispered. God help me. I see you, and it terrifies me. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Maria could feel herself falling, not just into his arms, but into something far more dangerous. Love. The spell was broken by the sound of heels clicking on marble outside the library door. Sebastian jerked his hand back as if she'd burned him, and Maria's heart sank as she watched his walls slam back into place. Sebastian? Victoria's voice was silk wrapped around steel. Are you in there, darling? Coming, mother, he called back, but his eyes never left Maria's face. We'll continue this conversation later. Will we? Maria asked, but he was already moving toward the door, transforming back into the cold, controlled man she'd met that first day. Count on it, he said. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echoes of what might have been. Maria sank into one of the leather chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. What was she doing? She'd come here for a job, not to fall in love with a man who lived in a different world. A man whose mother would destroy her without a second thought. As if summoned by her thoughts, Victoria's voice echoed from the hallway, sharp and carrying. Really, Sebastian, what were you thinking hiring that little nobody? She's completely unsuitable. The other staff are already talking. About what? Sebastian's voice was carefully neutral. About the way she looks at you. About the way you look at her. It's embarrassing, darling. What will people think? Maria crept closer to the door, her heart hammering as she strained to hear Sebastian's response. I don't particularly care what people think, Mother. Well, you should. The Ashworth dinner party is next week and Charlotte will be there. You remember Charlotte, Senator Ashworth's daughter? Beautiful, well-bred, absolutely perfect for you. I'm not interested in Charlotte Ashworth. Don't be ridiculous. She's everything you could want in a wife. Breeding, connections, money of her own. She won't make the mistake of falling in love with you. The casual cruelty of the statement made Maria's blood run cold. Victoria spoke about love as if it were a disease, something to be avoided at all costs. And what if I want someone to fall in love with me? Sebastian's voice was quiet, but Maria could hear the steel underneath. Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass, Oh, my dear boy, love is a luxury we can't afford. Look what it did to your father. It made him weak, vulnerable. Is that what you want? To be destroyed by some little nobody who thinks she can change you? Maria isn't a nobody. The fact that he'd used her first name made Maria's heart soar, but Victoria's next words brought her crashing back to earth. Maria, is it? How intimate? Tell me, Sebastian, have you bedded her yet, or are you still playing the gentleman? That's enough, Mother. I'll take that as a no then. Good. That means there's still time to fix this before you do something truly stupid. Victoria's voice was getting closer to the library door, and Maria scrambled back to the chair, her pulse racing. I've already spoken to the agency. They can have her replacement here by tomorrow. You did what? I fired her, of course. Effective immediately. Really, Sebastian, you should thank me. This little infatuation was becoming quite embarrassing. The silence that followed was so complete that Maria could hear her own heartbeat. Then Sebastian spoke, and his voice was like winter itself. Call the agency back, tell them there's been a mistake. Sebastian, tell them, he repeated, and there was something in his tone that made even Victoria pause. Miss Santos works for me, not you, and she'll continue to work for me as long as I deem it appropriate. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. He was defending her, standing up to his mother for her. It should have made her happy, but all she could think about was Victoria's earlier words. Love is a luxury we can't afford, because despite everything, despite the games and the walls and the impossible circumstances, Maria was falling in love with Sebastian Blackwell. And in his world, that made her the most dangerous woman alive. You look absolutely radiant tonight, Maria. Like a beautiful fraud dressed up in borrowed dreams. Charlotte Ashworth's voice was honey-laced with arsenic as she cornered Maria in the powder room during the most important dinner party of the Blackwell social calendar. The blonde socialite, all sharp cheekbones and predatory elegance in her designer gown, smiled like a shark scenting blood in the water. Maria's hands trembled as she adjusted the simple black dress Mrs. Henderson had lent her for the evening. Sebastian had insisted she attend as his personal assistant, much to Victoria's barely concealed fury. Now, surrounded by crystal mirrors and the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume, Maria wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. I'm sorry, Miss Ashworth, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, sweet child, Charlotte interrupted, moving closer until Maria could see the calculated coldness in her blue eyes. There's no misunderstanding at all. You see, I know exactly what you are. A pretty little nobody who thinks she can seduce her way into a world that will chew her up and spit her out. Through the powder room's open door, Maria could hear the murmur of conversation from the dining room, the clink of crystal and silver, the refined laughter of people who had never worried about where their next meal would come from. Sebastian's voice rose above the others, smooth and commanding, and her heart clenched with longing. Sebastian and I have an understanding, Charlotte continued, reapplying her lipstick with surgical precision. We've been promised to each other since childhood, a merger of families, you might say, very civilized, very appropriate. He's not property to be traded, Maria said, finding her voice despite the ice spreading through her veins. Charlotte's laugh was like breaking crystal. Isn't he? Dear little country mouse, you really don't understand how this world works, do you? Men like Sebastian don't marry for love. They marry for legacy, for bloodlines and bank accounts and social standing. That's not who he is, Maria protested. But even as she said it, doubt crept in like poison. Had she imagined the tenderness in his eyes? The vulnerability in his voice when he'd spoken about his father? Isn't it? Charlotte's smile was triumphant. Tell me, darling, has he introduced you to anyone tonight as anything other than the help? Has he defended you against his mother's very public disapproval? Or has he simply let you play dress-up while he conducts business with the adults? Each word hit like a physical blow because they were true. All evening, Sebastian had been the perfect host, charming, sophisticated, untouchable. He'd spoken to Maria only when necessary, his tone politely distant, as if she were exactly what Charlotte said she was, the help playing at being something more. I thought so, Charlotte said, reading the devastation on Maria's face. You poor deluded thing. Did you really think you were special? That you were different from all the other pretty girls who've tried to catch his attention? Others? The word escaped as barely a whisper. Oh yes, darling. There have been so many. Shop girls and waitresses and starry-eyed secretaries who thought they could change the big, bad billionaire with their pure hearts and simple ways. Charlotte's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Would you like to know what happened to them? Maria wanted to run, wanted to escape this gilded cage before she heard something that would destroy her completely. But she stood frozen, trapped by a morbid need to know the truth. He played with them for a while. Sebastian does so love a challenge. Then discarded them when he grew bored. Usually with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. Very clean, very efficient. Victoria taught him well. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Every tender moment, every heated glance, every whispered conversation in the library, had it all been a game? An elaborate seduction designed to pass the time until he grew bored and moved on to his next conquest? You're lying, Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Charlotte pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a private social media account. Here's Sophia, lasted 3 months. Beautiful girl, worked at his favorite restaurant. And here's Jennifer. She was his physical therapist after that skiing accident. Quite striking, really. Oh, and this is Amanda. She cleaned his penthouse in the city. Each photo was a dagger to Maria's heart. Beautiful women, all of them, young and hopeful and achingly similar to herself. Women who had probably stood in powder rooms just like this one, wearing borrowed dresses and believing in fairy tales. What happened to them? Maria asked, though she dreaded the answer. Gone, all of them. Vanished from his life as completely as if they'd never existed. Charlotte's smile was pure venom. Though I heard Amanda had a bit of a breakdown afterward. Something about being in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than an amusing diversion. The room spun around Maria as the full weight of Charlotte's revelation crashed down on her. She thought of Sebastian's words in the library. I could give you everything. Not love, not partnership, not forever. Just things. Pretty expensive things to make her compliant until he grew tired of the game. Why are you telling me this? Maria managed. Because unlike Sebastian, I don't enjoy watching innocent creatures get destroyed for sport, Charlotte said, though her tone suggested otherwise. And because I need you to understand that whatever little fantasy you've been living ends tonight. As if summoned by her words, the powder room door opened fully and Sebastian appeared in the doorway, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. His dark eyes swept over both women, and Maria saw the exact moment he realized what had been happening. Charlotte, he said, his voice carrying a warning. I believe your father is looking for you. Of course, darling. Charlotte moved toward the door, pausing to press a kiss to Sebastian's cheek that lingered just a moment too long. We'll continue our conversation later, won't we? The words were clearly meant for Maria, and they hit their target with devastating accuracy. Charlotte swept from the room like a queen, leaving Maria alone with the man who had just been revealed as either her salvation or her destruction. Maria, Sebastian said, his voice softer now. Whatever Charlotte said to you, is it true? The question erupted from her before she could stop it. The other women, Amanda and Sophia and Jennifer and all the rest? Sebastian's face went carefully blank and Maria felt her world shatter. His silence was answer enough. My God, she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. It's all been a game, hasn't it? Everything, the library, the conversations, the way you looked at me, it was all just entertainment. No, Sebastian said, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like guilt. Maria, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she said, backing away from him as if he were poisonous. You're exactly what your mother raised you to be, a predator who destroys everything he touches. That's not fair. Fair? Maria's voice rose and she didn't care who might hear. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me about the others. Fair would have been warning me that I was just the latest in a long line of women you've used and discarded. It wasn't like that, Sebastian said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're different. That's what you told all of them, isn't it? Maria's heart was breaking with every word, but she couldn't stop. Poor little country mouse, thinking she was special, thinking she meant something to the great Sebastian Blackwell. She pushed past him toward the door, but his hand caught her wrist, sending fire through her veins despite everything. Don't go, he said. And for a moment he sounded like the vulnerable man she'd glimpsed in the library. Please, Maria, let me explain. Explain what? She asked, turning to face him one last time. How you seduced me just like you seduced all the others. How you made me believe I could belong in your world when you never had any intention of letting me stay. The look in his eyes, part pain, part desperation, part something that might have been love, almost broke her resolve. Almost. I trusted you, she whispered, and the words seemed to hit him like physical blows. I was falling in love with you and you knew it. You knew it, and you let it happen anyway. Maria. But she was already gone, fleeing through the mansion's corridors like Cinderella at midnight. Except there would be no glass slipper, no happy ending. Just the cold reality of a fairy tale that had been nothing more than an elaborate lie. Behind her she could hear Sebastian calling her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she turned around, if she looked into those dark eyes one more time, she might forgive him, and that would destroy what little was left of her heart. By the time she reached her small room in the servants' quarters, Maria was crying so hard she could barely see. She threw her few belongings into her old duffel bag with shaking hands. Mrs. Henderson's dress carefully folded and left on the bed with a note of thanks. She was almost to the servants' entrance when Victoria appeared in the hallway like an avenging angel in couture. Leaving so soon? The older woman asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. How disappointing. I was so hoping to see how this little experiment would end. It's ended, Maria said, not trusting herself to say more. Yes, I can see that. Though I must say, you lasted longer than most. 3 weeks. Quite impressive, really. Of course, Sebastian does so enjoy a challenge. The casual cruelty was the final straw. Maria turned to face Victoria fully, no longer caring about consequences or propriety. You win, she said simply. Whatever this was, whatever game you were all playing, you win. But someday, Mrs. Blackwell, someone is going to see through your poison. Someone is going to love your son despite everything you've done to destroy his capacity for love. And when that happens, I hope you remember this moment. Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. You presumptuous little... But Maria was already walking away, stepping out into the cold night air that bit at her tear-stained cheeks. Her dying pickup truck coughed to life on the third try, and as she drove down the mansion's winding driveway for the last time, she didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see if Sebastian was watching from any of those golden windows. Couldn't bear to know if he cared that she was leaving, or if Charlotte was already in his arms, celebrating her victory. The fairy tale was over. It was time to go home. Your son is dying, Mr. Blackwell, and frankly, I don't think you give a damn. Doctor? Patricia Morris stood in the sterile hospital corridor, her scrub still stained with Sebastian's blood, her usually composed face etched with exhaustion and barely contained fury. The 60-year-old trauma surgeon had seen everything in her 30-year career, but she'd never encountered a family quite like the Blackwells. Victoria sat in the waiting room's most expensive chair like a queen holding court, her Chanel suit immaculate despite having spent 6 hours in the hospital. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the grieving mother to perfection for the small crowd of society reporters who'd somehow learned about Sebastian's accident. Accident. Even the word felt like a lie. 3 weeks had passed since Maria had driven away from the Blackwell mansion. 3 weeks of Sebastian descending into a spiral of self-destruction that had culminated in him wrapping his Lamborghini around an oak tree at 80 miles an hour. The police had called it an accident, weather conditions, a moment's distraction, but Mrs. Henderson knew better. He's been like a man possessed, she whispered to Dr. Morris, her wrinkled hands twisting her purse strap. Haven't slept, barely eating, drinking too much. And the way he's been working, 18, 20-hour days, as if he's trying to outrun his own shadow. Mrs. Henderson had been the one to call Maria, had tracked down the number for the small farmhouse in Tennessee where Maria had returned to care for her dying mother. The conversation had been brief, desperate. He's asking for you, love. Even unconscious, he keeps saying your name. Now Maria stood in that same corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs as she took in the circus surrounding Sebastian's private room. She looked different, thinner, shadows under her eyes that spoke of her own sleepless nights. But there was something else too, a strength that hadn't been there before, forged in the fire of heartbreak and her mother's gentle wisdom. You came, Mrs. Henderson breathed, appearing at her side like a guardian angel. I shouldn't have, Maria said, but her eyes were already seeking the door to Sebastian's room. I shouldn't be here. That boy needs you, more than he's ever needed anyone. He has Charlotte. He has his mother. He has his whole perfect world. Mrs. Henderson's laugh was bitter. Perfect? Child, that world has been anything but perfect since you left. Charlotte broke off their engagement 2 days after the dinner party, said she couldn't compete with a ghost, and his mother. The older woman's face darkened. She's been trying to have him declared mentally incompetent, claims the accident proves he's not fit to run the company. Maria's blood ran cold. What? The board meeting is tomorrow. If Sebastian doesn't wake up, if he can't speak for himself. Mrs. Henderson's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Victoria would finally have everything she'd ever wanted, complete control of the Blackwell Empire. Before Maria could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of Sebastian's room. Victoria's voice, sharp with authority, cut through the hospital's hushed atmosphere. Absolutely not. I forbid it. That little nobody has no right to be here. Maria turned to see Victoria bearing down on them like an avenging angel in designer heels, her perfect composure cracking for the first time since Maria had known her. Mrs. Blackwell, Dr. Morris said, stepping between them. Your son is in a coma. His brain activity suggests he can hear what's going on around him. If Miss Santos's presence might help. Help? Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. That creature is the reason my son is lying in there fighting for his life. Her and her pathetic attempts to seduce him into forgetting his responsibilities. Seduce him? Maria found her voice at last, and it carried a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. Your son seduced me, Mrs. Blackwell. Just like he seduced all the others before me. Just like you taught him to do. Victoria's face went white with rage. How dare you? How dare I tell the truth? Maria stepped forward, no longer the terrified girl who'd fled the mansion 3 weeks ago. Your son is lying in there because you've spent his entire life teaching him that love is weakness, that people are disposable, that his heart is something to be locked away and never, ever trusted to another person. Sebastian understands his place in the world. Sebastian understands nothing but pain, Maria said, her voice rising. Pain that you've been feeding him since childhood. Pain that's been eating him alive from the inside out. The reporters were filming now, their cameras capturing every word of what was rapidly becoming the scandal of the century. Victoria noticed and tried to regain control, but Maria wasn't finished. Do you want to know what your son told me, Mrs. Blackwell? He told me about watching his father die of a broken heart, about learning that love was just another way to be destroyed. You didn't just kill your husband. You killed your son's capacity for joy. Enough. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You are nothing. A nobody from nowhere who thinks she can waltz into our world and what? Love your son? Show him that he's worth more than his bank account? Prove that he doesn't have to be the cold, empty shell you've spent 30 years creating? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the reporters had stopped their chatter, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Dr. Morris cleared her throat. If we could perhaps focus on the patient. Yes, Maria said, never taking her eyes off Victoria. Let's focus on Sebastian. Let's focus on the fact that he's been asking for me, not you, not Charlotte, not any of the people you think belong in his perfect world. Me. Victoria's hands shook with rage. You will not see my son. I'll have security. Actually, you won't. The new voice belonged to a man in an expensive suit, Sebastian's lawyer, Maria realized. He looked tired and grim as he approached their group. I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwell, but Sebastian's medical power of attorney was transferred 6 months ago. In the event of his incapacitation, all decisions regarding his care fall to... He consulted his tablet. Miss Maria Santos. The words hit like a bomb in the sterile corridor. Victoria staggered, as if she'd been physically struck, while Maria felt the world tilt on its axis. That's impossible, Victoria breathed. I'm afraid not. The documents were filed shortly after Miss Santos began working for your family. Sebastian was quite specific about his wishes. The lawyer turned to Maria. The decision is yours, Miss Santos. You have the legal authority to determine his treatment, his visitors, everything. Maria stared at the man, her mind reeling. Sebastian had given her power over his life? When? Why? And then she remembered, the day in his study, the day he'd asked her to strip the wallpaper. He'd been working on legal documents, signing papers. Had he planned this even then? I need to see him, she said quietly. Alone. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but the lawyer shook his head. I'm afraid Miss Santos's word is final in this matter. As Maria walked toward Sebastian's room, her legs feeling like water, she could hear Victoria's furious voice behind her. This isn't over. When Sebastian wakes up, when he's thinking clearly, he'll remember where he belongs. And it isn't with some trailer park nobody who... The words cut off abruptly as Maria closed the door behind her. Sebastian lay in the hospital bed like a fallen prince, his dark hair stark against the white pillows, his face pale but still achingly beautiful. Machines beeped softly around him, monitoring his vital signs, keeping him tethered to life. His hands, those elegant, powerful hands that had touched her face so tenderly, lay still on the white sheets. Hello, Sebastian, Maria whispered, moving to his bedside. Mrs. Henderson says you've been asking for me. No response, just the steady rhythm of the machines. But Maria could swear she saw his eyelids flutter slightly. I want you to know that I forgive you, she continued, settling into the chair beside his bed. For the games, for the lies, for making me believe I was special when I was just convenient. I forgive you because I finally understand. She reached out tentatively and took his hand in hers. His skin was warm, real, alive. You weren't playing games with me, were you? You were playing games with yourself, trying to prove that your mother was right, that love was just another transaction, that you were incapable of feeling anything real. A tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto their joined hands. But I felt it, Sebastian. In the library, when you told me about your father. In your study, when you looked at me like I was something precious. You felt it too, didn't you? That's why you ran. That's why you let me believe the worst. The machines continued their steady beeping, but Maria could swear his fingers had tightened slightly around hers. Your mother thinks she's won. She thinks you'll wake up and go back to being her perfect, emotionless son. But I know better now. I know that the man who gave me power over his life, who trusted me with his future, who crashed his car because he couldn't bear to live without love, that man is stronger than her poison. Maria leaned closer, her lips almost touching his ear. So here's what's going to happen, Sebastian Blackwell. You're going to wake up. You're going to fight for what you want instead of what she wants. And you're going to prove to both of us that love isn't weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to save you. As if her words had reached him across the void of unconsciousness, Sebastian's eyes fluttered open. His gaze found hers immediately, and Maria saw something there that took her breath away. Hope. Maria, he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd recently removed. You came. I came, she confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "The question is, are you ready to stop running?" Sebastian's answer was to lift their joined hands to his lips and press the gentlest of kisses to her knuckles. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. "I just didn't know it until I lost you." Outside the room, Maria could hear Victoria's voice raised in anger, could hear the reporters clamoring for statements. But inside this small space, surrounded by the steady beep of machines and the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, the world had suddenly become very simple. It was just two people who had found each other against impossible odds, and who were finally ready to fight for their right to love. "I resign." The two words dropped into the Blackwell Industries boardroom like bombs, silencing the 20 most powerful people in corporate America. Sebastian stood at the head of the mahogany table, still pale from his hospital stay but radiating a strength that made even the most hardened executives lean forward in their chairs. Victoria sat frozen in her seat, her perfectly manicured fingers white-knuckled around her Mont Blanc pen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Sebastian was supposed to be weak, grateful, malleable after his brush with death. He was supposed to fall in line. Instead, he looked like a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "Sebastian," Victoria's voice was honey over broken glass, "you're still recovering. Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until when, Mother? Until you can have me declared incompetent? Until you can seize control of a company that was never meant to be yours?" Sebastian's voice carried across the room with deadly calm. "I know about the mental health petition you filed. I know about the bribes you've offered to board members. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Victoria's murderous gaze. The woman who had terrorized Manhattan's elite for decades was finally being exposed, and they all knew it. "You ungrateful," Victoria began, but Sebastian held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Yes, I resign as CEO of Blackwell Industries, effective immediately." He paused, letting the shock ripple through the room. "However, as majority shareholder, I'm restructuring the company entirely. 51% of my shares are being transferred to the Maria Santos Foundation for Educational Excellence." The explosion of voices was immediate and deafening. Victoria's face went ashen, then red, then a shade of purple that suggested an imminent stroke. "You cannot be serious," she gasped. "You're giving away billions to that little nobody? To prove what? That you can throw the biggest tantrum in corporate history?" Sebastian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm proving that some things matter more than money, Mother. Something you never understood and never will." He pressed a button on the conference table's control panel, and the room's massive screens flickered to life. Maria's face appeared, lived from the small farmhouse in Tennessee where she'd been caring for her mother. Even through the video feed, her beauty was luminous, but it was the strength in her eyes that made several board members sit up straighter. "Miss Santos," Sebastian said, his voice softening in a way that made Victoria flinch, "would you do me the honor of accepting the position of CEO of your foundation?" Maria's smile was radiant even through the pixelated connection. "Only if you'll accept the position of my partner, in business and in life." "Is that a proposal, Miss Santos?" "That depends, Mr. Blackwell. Are you finally ready to stop running from the best thing that ever happened to you?" The room held its collective breath as Sebastian moved toward the screen, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. "I've been ready since the moment you walked into my life and showed me what real strength looks like." "Then yes," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to the foundation, yes to the partnership, and yes to whatever question you're about to ask me." Sebastian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Even the most jaded board members felt their hearts skip as he opened it to reveal a simple but stunning diamond ring. "Maria Santos, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your love? Only if you promise to stop trying to prove yourself worthy," Maria said through her tears. "You already are. You always were." The boardroom erupted in applause, genuine applause from people who had thought they were too sophisticated for fairy tales. But Victoria's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. "This is insane!" she shrieked, rising from her chair with trembling fury. "You're destroying everything your father built, everything our family represents." Sebastian turned to face his mother, and Maria could see through the video feed that his expression held no anger, only pity. "Our family represents fear, Mother. Fear of love, fear of vulnerability, fear of anything that can't be controlled or bought. Dad didn't build an empire. He built a prison, and I'm finally breaking free." "You'll regret this," Victoria hissed. "When the novelty wears off, when you remember who you really are, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be here." "You're right," Sebastian said simply. "You won't be here, because as of today, you no longer have any connection to Blackwell Industries or the Blackwell Family Trust. Your allowance is terminated, your company credit cards are canceled, and your access to all family properties is revoked." Victoria staggered as if she'd been struck. "You can't. I'm your mother. You're a woman who chose bitterness over love and poison over joy. You destroyed my father, tried to destroy me, and would have destroyed Maria if I'd let you." Sebastian's voice was firm but not cruel. "But I won't let you destroy anything else. It's time for you to learn what it means to make your own way in the world." The security guards who entered the boardroom were professional and discreet, but their message was clear. Victoria Blackwell's reign of terror was over. As his mother was escorted from the room, her perfect composure finally, completely shattered, Sebastian turned back to the screen where Maria waited. "Now that the obstacles are cleared," he said, his voice warm with love and promise, "I have a plane to catch." 6 months later, the wedding was nothing like the society spectacle Victoria would have demanded. Instead, it took place in the small church where Maria's parents had been married, surrounded by rolling Tennessee hills and the kind of simple beauty that no amount of money could buy. Maria wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered and lovingly preserved, while Sebastian stood at the altar in a simple black suit, looking more relaxed and genuinely happy than anyone who knew him had ever seen. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and beaming like a proud grandmother. Beside her sat Maria's mother, weak from her illness but radiant with joy at seeing her daughter so loved. The Maria Santos Foundation had already opened 3 schools in underprivileged areas, and Sebastian had discovered a passion for hands-on philanthropy that his old corporate life had never provided. Together they were building something beautiful, not just a marriage but a legacy of hope. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian cupped Maria's face in his hands and looked into her eyes with wonder. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" "For seeing the man I could become instead of the man I was. For saving me from a life without love." Maria's smile was radiant as she reached up to touch his face. "You saved yourself, Sebastian. You just needed someone to believe you were worth saving." Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, the kiss of 2 people who had found their way home after a long and difficult journey. In the back of the church, unnoticed by the celebrating crowd, a single figure watched from the shadows. Victoria Blackwell, no longer the imperious society queen but a woman learning to live on her own for the first time in her life, felt something crack open in her chest as she watched her son's happiness. She would never admit it, would never apologize for the pain she'd caused. But in that moment, seeing Sebastian's face transform with joy as he kissed his bride, she finally understood what she had spent so many years fighting against. Love wasn't weakness. Love was the strongest force in the universe. And her son, her brilliant, beautiful, broken son, had finally found his way to it. As the newlyweds walked down the aisle together, hand in hand and hearts full of promise, the last rays of sunset streamed through the church's stained glass windows, painting everything in gold. They stepped out into their new life together, into a world where love had conquered all the obstacles money and power could create. Behind them, the small congregation erupted in cheers and rice and joy. Ahead of them stretched forever, simple, precious, and perfect in every way that mattered. The fairy tale was complete. The prince had found his princess, not in a castle or a ballroom, but in the courage to choose love over everything else. And they lived as all the best love stories promise, Happily ever after. The end.